You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 68 of Making Tracks, brought to you by the fine folk over at fanfortracks.com. My name's Mark, I'm your co-host, and this week, as always, I am joined by the only man who's able to milk a blurg with one hand whilst tossing off an Ewok with the other, Mr. Mark Newbold.
You say that as a joke, but tossing Ewoks is actually very much of a skill because you've got to make them flip so they land on their feet. I mean, it's not you don't just wang them. It's not Ewok wanging, it's Ewok tossing. It's got to be done properly. I learned from the best. Ozzy Osbourne taught me everything I know. How you doing, Mark?
Yeah, I'm very well. A little bird tells me that this is not only episode 68, but actually this is episode 100 when you take into account all the studio episodes that we've recorded. And by studio, we mean in our lounges and our collection rooms and everywhere else, and also the more live interview episodes and specials that have come from conventions and other stuff like that. So congratulations on 100 episodes.
I know, it's gone so quickly. And we've got around a bit. I mean, obviously we've not got around much this year because of everything that's been going on and interview episodes and such. Yeah, it is. It's the 100th episode of Making Tracks, but obviously as a studio episode, it's number 68. We got a lot to go through today, haven't we?
Yeah, we've got tons and tons and tons. Obviously, we've got to carry on our conversation from last week, which was to do with all the big announcements and reveals from the Disney Investor Day. But also, yes, we definitely need to talk about that final episode of The Mandalorian, The Rescue, which literally dropped about an hour and a half ago. So we've seen it like once. So this is kind of like our raw reaction episode. So we've got a lot to get through. So we should probably crack on. Last night, we received word that Jeremy Bulloch, the original actor who portrayed Boba Fett in The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, passed away in hospital at the age of 75. It's another sad day, and what we did see at the end of The Mandalorian, it's kind of a little bit bittersweet.
It is, yeah, because the focus so heavily has been on Fett this season, coming back into the show and into the Star Wars galaxy. And yeah, like you say, to lose Jeremy, terribly sad. I think a lot of people on Fantha Tracks who are part of Fantha Tracks knew Jeremy or had met him, universally liked, great bloke, good fun, always ready with a joke and ready to have a laugh. Just terribly sad. Another original trilogy legend gone now. And like you say, you know, on the eve, literally on the eve of the final episode of season 2 of The Mandalorian, with Fett coming back so strongly, just terribly sad. And only 3 weeks after Dave Prowse, of course, passed away. So within a month, we've lost the original Darth Vader and the original Boba Fett.
I mean, my Facebook yesterday was just littered with, you know, photos of various Facebook friends about who have met Jeremy Bulloch, either out of the kind of more official convention type photo shoots that he used to do, or just like the behind the scenes photos. And just the general reaction from everybody was obviously of devastated loss, but also just what such a nice guy he was, and he had such a winning smile. He, you know, the times that I'd met him at conventions and troops and stuff, he always went out of his way to talk to the costumers and that, especially, as well as interact with the members of the public. And you went on a road trip with him, didn't you?
Yeah, back when me, Matt were both with Jedi News, along with Dave Tree and James, obviously James Burns. The 6 of us with Jeremy and Maureen, his wife, all drove from Elstree Studios all the way to Celebration Europe in Essen. So it took about 5 days to get there. So it was obviously over the channel and then into France, met up with garrisons as we went. So into France, into Holland and Belgium, and finally to Germany. And then, of course, we had to drive back as well, which was just fantastic to have that time with him, just chit-chatting about silly stuff, really, because you can only talk about Star Wars for so long. And we did, you know, lots of interesting little stories, but to get that way and just start talking about the football because he was a Spurs fan, and just about life in general and all sorts of stuff that you don't necessarily remember, because in the moment there's 4 people sitting in a car and it's just chit-chatting whilst you're blasting down the Autobahn. Brilliant memories, and very fortunate.
I'm Derek Arnold, and I get my news from Fantha Tracks.
So today brought the final episode of season 2 of The Mandalorian to us on Disney Plus, The Rescue, directed by Peyton Reed. Wow, where do we even start with an episode that's got as much stuff in it as this? It brought us reveals that we probably never thought we'd ever get to see, certainly thrown back a lot of characters from season 2 of the show. Action-packed, emotional. Where do you even start with this, Mark? Give me your gut feeling. We've both literally only just watched this. This is as raw as it gets. And just before we dive too far in, huge spoiler alert, and we'll put it all over the site article as well. We are going to go deep on this episode. So if you want to step away and don't want to hear it until after you've seen it, or if you feel it's too soon, then now's the time to come back to us a little bit later on when we talk about the Disney projects. But for now, Mark, first thoughts.
Oh my God, that was amazing. It was such an action-packed episode. It was, 46 minutes, and it had a really good kind of pace to it. A little bit of downtime at the beginning when we kind of meet Bo-Katan and that whole kind of confrontation between her and Fett was just interesting in its own right. And we could talk for like hours about that, I think. But yeah, then, just an all-out blitzkrieg assault on Moff Gideon's cruiser, and what an ending. And the ending, whilst I would say like an ending that a part of my mind was thinking this is the obvious or natural ending, but at the same time it kind of still left on a cliffhanger because it didn't feel like there was a huge amount of resolution in the overall thing. We don't know what happens now between Mando and Bo-Katan. That's one big thing. And obviously we don't know what happens with Grogu and Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, Luke Skywalker. I mean, wow. When the start of the episode, as you say, getting the gang together, getting the Mandalorian teams together was fascinating to see all those guys walk in a bar. If you're another person in that bar with those characters in there, you'd feel very much on high alert, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But,
getting onto the whole sequence with the Imperial shuttle, which was fantastic, capturing Dr. Pershing, which was very interesting as well. Setting up the scenario for Fett to drop out of hyperspace and make it look like they were being chased. That sequence was movie quality in itself. But all the time, Gideon's watching and he's savvy. He's thinking there's something not right here. He's not stupid. He knows that this isn't as it should be.
Yeah.
The Dark Troopers, what did he make of them? I mean, they were menacing.
Weren't they just? They were really, really menacing and unrelenting. They just looked awesome. And to be fair, I don't think, from what I recall, they were too far off from what we've seen in like Expanded Universe. You could tell what they were straight away. I mean, I was kind of expecting the whole power-up scenario to play out a little bit further, almost like that was a big tension builder for at least a part of the episode, but it seemed like they powered up and they just got straight into it. But yeah, I mean, that one Dark Trooper taking on Din Djarin and just pummeling his head straight into the ship, and that Beskar just doesn't move, it doesn't scratch at all, but like the bulkhead behind it was just getting flattened and dented and stuff. I'm surprised he was able to pull his noggin out of there, but yeah, so that was really great. And coming back to when they first land and stuff, I just thought that how those TIE fighters just kind of shot out of that cruiser was very Colonial Viper Battlestar Galactica feel. I don't know if that was meant to be a completely direct reference or stuff, but that's how it felt, and I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I quite liked that. Moff Gideon is very much, he's not too arrogant to kind of like think that like he's impenetrable where he is, and he's pretty savvy to cotton onto the fact that it all looked a little bit sussed. And I mean, I felt it looked a little bit sussed. As soon as the crew disembark, they just start kicking ass, and it's 4 amazing Star Wars characters just taking down stormtroopers left, right and centre in a kind of a really brutal, unrelenting kind of way, which I don't think we've seen before in Star Wars.
No, not to that level. I mean, they were not there to make friends and influence people, were they? They were straight in, kicking people down and blasting them. I mean, just stepping back to the Dark Troopers, it very much made me think, because to me, the black armour, it is very evocative of the Dark Troopers that we know. I think they were like gunmetal grey, but also all very much like super battle droids, which of course was the last thing Dim saw before the Mandos rescued him and he became a foundling. So there was, I saw some parity there. Yeah, he took a pummeling. He managed to figure it out. Thank goodness he got the Beskar staff with him, which of course comes into play later on when he has the face-off with Gideon. And that sequence in the room, the kids got the shackles on. Grogu can't really do much. Gideon is giving the whole speech to Mando. I've got what I need from the child. You take him. And I'm thinking, well, that's too easy. That's too much of a, we get each other. He was playing Mando completely. And then he was, because, of course, the Darksaber comes out. The sequence where Mando finally gets his hands on the Beskar staff and it's glowing red as the Darksaber's hitting it. That was phenomenal sequence.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what I've really liked about this series, is the fact that they give him enough tools to do the job and nothing's wasted. And so the fact that that was the only thing that was pretty much left unscratched when the Razor Crest got destroyed makes sense that he was going to have to use something like that against Gideon. Because, Gideon was quite rightly pointed out, like he's used all his whistling birds. He's only got one salvo. So I think I was left feeling a little bit empty and hollow by Moff Gideon at the end of season 1. I kind of felt like he just felt like a caricature of like a mustache twirling evil baddie kind of dude, with a cape and all that. But this season, I think he's added a lot more depth and kind of like a more of a cerebral vibe to him, a bit like Grand Admiral Thrawn in some respects. Like, Thrawn very much knows what his enemies, are capable of and keeps tabs on them, 24/7. So as soon as like everybody boards his ship, he kind of knows, well, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have Bo-Katan's going to take down wants to take the ship, whereas obviously Din Djarin is here for the child, and quite rightly so. He places himself in probably the most important place, which is with Grogu, and then lulls Din into a full sense of security, which he telegraphed that a little bit. I saw that coming, but what a fight. What a really brutal fight. And like you said, that Beskar stuff was glowing by the end of it. And I was pleasantly surprised that he didn't just plunge it into his chest or something like that. I was kind of semi-expecting this was possibly the end of Moff Gideon, even though we've heard from Giancarlo Esposito about, he might be, in season 3 or 4 or whatever that is, they might have him this time, and he might just like emotions get the better of him and stuff. What Bo-Katan says, he's going to take out his anger and frustration on having to rescue Grogu on the Moff.
I like what you say about him being a cerebral opponent, because the fight is the fight and it's a fantastic fight, but it's read to me looking or thinking back to it that he was on the attack, he's got the Darksaber, but he's savvy enough to know that Din isn't savvy enough to know, because he doesn't know it, that he can't just go, there you go, Bo-Katan, there's the Darksaber. As soon as that sequence began, I said to Ruth, I know what's going to happen here. She's got to beat him. It's a Klingon thing. You've got to beat him in combat. I says, he can't just give it to her. And when she just says, no, you can't just give it to me. That's setting something very interesting up for the future. And the great thing is, of course, by this point, Luke turns up in the X-Wing, laces through all those Dark Troopers, comes onto the bridge that, lifts the cape down, and there he is. It's him. And we have that sequence, something that I don't think any of us ever thought we'd see in live-action Star Wars. And it's Mark Hamill playing the role as well, which was wonderful, given all the expectation of he's done with Star Wars. And it's like, he's so not done with Star Wars. No. Now he's kind of started a whole other thing. He can now play Luke 6 years after Jedi.
I think it was great, and I loved actually how we kind of saw most of it through that kind of security camera kind of feed.
Yes.
So it was kind of that removed kind of aspect. And what was interesting, because basically I went back and listened to some of the episode with the audio description, which if you haven't done, you should do, because the audio description for The Mandalorian is really good. Not just by the performance of the audio commentator, but actually by the scripting and stuff. It's there's some really interesting terms that they use to describe the actions and the motion and stuff. But at no point did they actually say Luke Skywalker's name. So it wasn't mentioned in, obviously, the main dialogue, and it wasn't mentioned in the audio description. The closest thing that they get to is they refer to the fact that the Jedi still got his boyish young looks like he did on the Death Star. That is the only kind of nod towards Luke Skywalker. And actually, although I don't exactly remember, I don't even think they mentioned R2-D2 by name, which again suggests that actually not everybody knows Luke Skywalker, which is quite interesting, because obviously in 35 years' time, we know that there is a big kind of legend of Luke Skywalker and he's just a myth and all that. But at that point, he's still fairly unknown, even by the people in that room.
That's a great point. I mean, I sincerely hope that is the Luke that we know and love, because it feels like this is definitely the end of a chapter as Grogu goes off with Luke. If that's Luke setting up a new academy and Grogu goes with him, and that's where they go with that, and he's safe with them. And like I said to you earlier, it felt to me that scene with Grogu and Mando saying their goodbyes to each other, it was like the end of E.T. I mean, the music was beautiful, just the whole, everything about it. Luke saying, may the force be with you, and the whole thing of Din stood there without the helmet on.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zeborelios, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the force be with you.
Given the post-credit sequence all the talk of the Boba Fett series that everybody's been saying, which wasn't mentioned during the Disney investors call last week, I wonder whether or not actually that's season 3 of The Mandalorian. And Din and Grogu are now, for the time being, out of The Mandalorian because we've now got Ahsoka coming up as a show. Very easily could have Grogu turned up in Ahsoka. At Legends of the Rangers, similar. Could just be that The Mandalorian as a show shifts focus to Fennec Shand and Boba Fett, because that end sequence going back to Jabba's palace, I was out of my seat again. This show's given me the best cardio workout ever. Seeing the palace going inside, it's like, my goodness, we've not been here for 30 odd years. Bib Fortuna sitting on the dais, which was wonderful. And that whole sequence playing out there. They couldn't have teed up season 3 better. No.
And actually, kind of going back to the Disney Investor Day, there was no real overt confirmation of Mandalorian season 3 as such. I think it was slightly mentioned it was coming in December next year. And what have we got? We've got the Book of Boba. Like I think we discussed before, the Mandalorian doesn't necessarily have to mean Din Djarin. It could be like an umbrella title, which could be Bo-Katan, it could be Sabine, it could be Boba Fett. And it can be Din Djarin, obviously. I mean, I was surprised actually that Boba actually, sauntered back in and then stood on that Rancor grate, because I was thinking, come on, you know what's going on here. So like, I'm thinking either they haven't got another pet Rancor, or like this is just going to be done and dusted really quickly. And yeah, straight away, just no hesitation, just get rid of Fat Fortuna right away. So
Blob Fortuna, yeah.
Blob Fortuna. Yeah, actually, that's a little bit nicer sounding. That in itself, I was just like, wow, we're kind of in a stalemate between Din Djarin and Bo-Katan. So either that means something's going to happen off camera, or maybe we're going to get a Mandalorian season 3, which has basically got 2 storylines concurrently running. So you've got Boba Fett on Tatooine, setting up, I guess, maybe his criminal underworld, and then maybe you've still got that story with Bo-Katan and Din Djarin. They can have a battle. She doesn't need to kill him.
You'd like to think that, but I mean, if you look at it black and white where we leave it, Din Djarin is holding the Darksaber. Din Djarin, essentially, for all intents and purposes, is the ruler of Mandalore now.
He's Mandalore, yeah.
And Boba Fett now runs the underworld. So you've gone from these 2 characters being very under the radar to, in the post-credit coda, him and Fennec doing that, and Fennec clearly being perfectly happy with that situation. She looks well happy.
She's quite smug, drinking that spotchka, yeah.
Totally, yeah, exactly. Mando completely... because he doesn't know that code, he only knows his code. He's walked into this scenario of, well, crap, I did not want this. I mean, maybe it's the case that the person who doesn't want it is the right, it's like, maybe this is the way. But Bo-Katan really did show her, not arrogance, that's maybe not the right word, but she was very sure of her destiny to be the ruler of Mandalore.
Yeah.
Is that necessarily the right person to be the ruler of Mandalore? Because Din does have... He has seen a lot of the galaxy, clearly, so has Bo, but Din's seen a lot of the world, and he's coming at it from a different angle. I just think that storyline with Din, with Bo, could very easily be transposed across to one of the other series, give that a kickstart straight away, a storyline that everyone's already invested in, and The Mandalorian is the hit show on Disney+, with Boba Fett in the lead. It's a guaranteed OMG. Who's not going to watch that? We've just had Luke Skywalker turn up. We're back at Jabba's palace. I mean, it's Return of the Jedi carrying on. It's who ever could have imagined that, even when Mandalorian as a show started just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, precisely. You're right. If we had had this conversation after chapter 1 of The Mandalorian saying this is where at least, season 2 is going to end up, we'd be like, yeah, okay, well, that's some nice fan speculation. But actually to see it on screen, it's mind-blowing. To touch back on the Bo-Katan thing, yeah, you are right. There is that thing where throughout this whole story arc of hers that we've seen, you could argue that maybe she's kind of borderline obsessive. She's obviously motivated to restore her planet, but then it's like, are you doing it for the altruistic reasons of making sure that the planet gets restored and her people get restored, or is this more of a status thing about, because she is the heir of Mandalore, that's where she deserves to be, so that's where she feels she needs to be? And like you said, when you're carrying a burden, sometimes you don't want to carry it, but you do it because you realise that's what's best for everybody else. And that's one thing I noticed, is that there was no reverence to the Darksaber by Din. So either that means that whole kind of notion isn't part of his belief system, isn't part of a sect that brought him up. But it does also come back to that bit of, I think it was French audio description. And basically, in the audio description or the subtitles, they refer to him as the heir to the Death Watch. to actually say that in the French translation, I thought was a bit interesting. And it could just be a translation issue, but that was quite interesting. And to find that by the end of season 2, he's now got the Darksaber. Because that's the thing, because you do wonder, once that lift doors is closed, they see the T-65 fly off, what the conversation is, what happens, who gets Moff Gideon, where things go from there. One thing I was quite surprised and pleasantly surprised about was actually Cara Dune made it through the episode, because there was that slight feeling that maybe, if anybody was going to get clipped or kind of maybe take a blaster bolt, it was probably going to be her in this episode, just from the feeling of like her story had almost come to like a fairly natural conclusion, so to speak, that now she's kind of legitimate and all that. So I was really pleasantly surprised that didn't happen, and they kind of, I think they played on that tension a little bit with her blaster rifle. Luckily she's still with it. So again, that kind of, I guess, reinforces the rumours about, she could be in the Rangers of the New Republic.
Yeah, I wasn't 100% sure Fennec would get through it, because obviously now she's now part of the Bad Batch. She's been resurrected. So I didn't know whether she would get through. And now clearly she's got a phenomenal storyline ahead of her now, which is fantastic. And a history with the Bad Batch, and Marvel and Lucasfilm and IDW and everybody hopefully will tell stories, and Del Rey to fill in the gaps between those two time periods. So we're going to learn more about her. And also it struck me as well, because if she was around at the time of the Bad Batch, there was a moment where Fennec and Bo were looking at each other, and I thought they know each other. I think there's a moment there. I also thought the moment where Luke had Grogu in his hands, and I'm just thinking in his head, he's thinking, you look just like my master.
Yeah.
There would have been quite an emotional moment for Luke as well. But of course, our focus is on Din. It's filling up. The best thing about the end of this season, well, the worst thing is that this season has ended. We've got to wait literally 12 months for the next one. But I think this has not only set up season 3 very clearly in that sort of James Bond will return in the Spy Who Loved Me type ending, but also I think it's teed up the 2 spin-off series as well, because I think you've got a story where Cara takes Moff Gideon back to the New Republic, and that's a storyline. You've got Luke taking Grogu, and that's a storyline. Bo versus Mando versus Din Djarin, that's a storyline. Yeah. So you've really teed up, when we saw what happened with Boba and Fennec, so we've really set up a heck of a lot of extra and additional storylines that hopefully will play out on television.
I'm Gareth Edwards, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks Radio.
So last week saw the Disney Investors Call, which brought with it not only a bunch of Disney stuff and Pixar stuff and Marvel stuff and other stuff and information for shareholders and all that good news, but loads of Star Wars content as well. And last episode 68, we talked about the Acolyte, Ahsoka, Andor, Bad Batch and Droid story. Let's pick up where we left off alphabetically with Lando. What do you make of this? They're sort of inferring that it's a mini-series, and it's clearly really early doors. They're just getting this off the ground.
Yeah, this is cool. I mean, we'd heard, and I think we even may have talked about rumours of a Lando series back in the summer. And obviously, there's been a lot of push by people on social media and Twitter and that for the hashtag Make Solo 2 happen. So possibly, do we think that actually we're not going to get a Solo 2, but actually we're going to get a Lando series? It looks quite likely now that they've announced this. And as you said, yeah, nothing's been kind of fleshed out beyond like the logo as such, but even that can change, as we know. So yeah, I think this could be fun. I thought Lando was awesome in Solo, so it's great that he's getting his own miniseries, and hopefully it's not just going to be Lando. We might even see a little bit of Mr. Solo and Chewbacca and the Falcon in it anyway. So
yeah, I'm wondering on this one whether it will be Donald Glover, or they could carry on after Rise of Skywalker and have Lando do what he said he was going to do with Janna and go and find her sort of lineage, if you like. But also, there's the thought of doing something along the lines of Young Indie Chronicles, where you've got old Lando bookending it, young Lando going off and doing the adventure. Whatever they do, whether it's a direct sort of Solo spin-off, which is kind of how it feels to me. I mean, Cassian is obviously the Rogue One prequel, and the Acolyte is the High Republic live action thing. They've all kind of got a place. They've not said that Lando is the Solo spin-off, but it kind of feels like it probably could be. It's from Justin Simeon. He's just in the early stages of sort of pulling it together. So this is really, really like ground zero in terms of announcement. We know we're getting a Lando series and an event series, as they call it, kind of like a mini-series. What's your gut tell you that it'll be?
I don't know, but just thinking about it, as you kind of said about how you could you could potentially have like a young Indiana Jones Chronicles style thing with Billy D bookending an episode which has got Donald Glover in it. Did you ever read Daniel Jose Older's Last Shot?
I didn't.
That is definitely one of my favourite new canon novels. And in that, they basically have 3 storylines. So you kind of have a flashback kind of storyline with Han and a flashback storyline with Lando. And then at the time, a present day Han and Lando thing. So if you could, why not do something like that? And kind of rather than just it being like a fairly kind of bookended kind of thing, but why not have a slightly more interesting story where actually events of Lando's past are kind of catching up with him? And, you know, so stuff that Donald Glover is dealing with, then Billy D has to deal with in the present day, as it were. So rather than just underutilizing Billy D, perhaps, maybe just kind of using both of them. And so you've got 2 different Landos at 2 different time periods, but one story. That would be quite cool.
It'd be great, wouldn't it? I mean, with Solo in the Force Awakens era, Harrison Ford, obviously, and Lando, obviously, being around in that same era, we don't see Lando again until Rise of Skywalker, but there's nothing to say that they hadn't crossed paths earlier. And both actors are of such an age that if you wanted them to play 5 years younger, they could do it without too much of a trouble in that sense. So there's there's the potential to see Harrison again as Han, to see Billy D again as Lando. So, you know, they could do that if they wanted to, but my gut tells me that this is more likely to be Alden and Donald Glover.
Hello, I'm Ahmed Best, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Obi-Wan. We knew it was coming, going into production within the next couple of months. Obviously, Ewan McGregor is back as Obi-Wan. They've confirmed that Hayden is back, not as Anakin in flashbacks, which is what we thought we would get, but as Darth Vader. What do you think of that?
That's really interesting. And that is just something that, yeah, like you said, no one was expected. What I really liked was the little sizzle logo that they put out, which kind of had the Kenobi title kind of resolved from sand. So I think it's fairly clear that there's going to be some Tatooine-based adventure anyway. I'm slightly of 2 mixed minds here, because there is that part of me that has always thought they fought on Mustafar, and then literally the next time that Obi-Wan and Vader meet each other is on the Death Star. That's in my mind how it kind of was. And so I'm just like, is that going to potentially cheapen actually what we see in A New Hope by having some kind of fight in earlier on, or actually will it make that even more emotive? And I guess that's the challenge, is if you're going to have Hayden as Vader and you're going to have Ewan there, you're going to have a fight that is going to be emotive and really plays on the confrontation on Mustafar, but also then really helps to set up the final confrontation on the Death Star.
Yeah, I mean, my thought on that is that the logic of having Hayden back in, because when we talked about this before, him and Ewan both have aged very well, so I don't think it would be a stretch to consider them playing Anakin and Obi-Wan at pretty much the ages they were as we saw them in Sith. Bit of jiggery-pokery, ILM at their doing what they do. You know, they could make that work. But also, there's always been that connection between the two. And Ben clearly knew the fate of Vader by the time of Star Wars. Maybe this is how he learns it. But also, it could be a bit of a Wrath of Khan situation where they're both in the story, but not necessarily face-to-face. So that, you know, it might not be the case that they're toe-to-toe physically, but they're involved in, you know, concurrently involved in the same events, but from a distance. I don't mind what it is. I'm stoked to think that Hayden's coming back to Star Wars to play, well, as it says, Darth Vader. You got to remember, as soon as he kneels before Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith,
that's the other thing,
he's Darth Vader, isn't he? Yeah.
That's it. Here's something for you, in your opinion, then. Do we think it's a bit of a disservice possibly to Hayden Christensen to kind of bring him back and for him to be stuck in the suit? So therefore, the casting's slightly, for lack of a better term, maybe a gimmick casting, playing on the, you know, the history and the goodwill of the prequels to set this up? Or do you think potentially that there could still be the option of Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker in flashbacks, and they're using him as Darth Vader because technically at that point he wasn't kneeling in front of the Emperor and he was Vader?
Well, a bit of both, really. One, I would imagine Hayden to think he, as an actor, to be Darth Vader, he's going to find that attractive. But also, Rogue One showed Vader in the tank with all the limbs off. We've seen comics where he's had to, you know, quickly shift gear and use a battle droid's leg and all that sort of stuff in the current run of the Star Wars comics. So Vader is constantly upgraded. You see him in his meditation chamber without his helmet on. There's lots of moments where Vader isn't with the helmet. A lot, it's like Mando, you know, taking the helmet off. Yeah, you would see Hayden's face. So I think there's potential for that. I think he's in for a lot of makeup work. That's certainly for for sure. But, I think there's definitely that potential. But I really do think it's so attractive to think that you could get those Clone Wars era flashbacks. There's great potential there. And I think that's probably a big pull for both the actors. But also, again, real world, they've both weathered really well. So why not do that?
So, following on from Kenobi, we've got the completely new announcement, Rangers of the New Republic.
I'm really intrigued by this one because they've kind of set up this whole Rangers vibe with Cara, with the X-Wing pilots on the rim. This era of the Republic is renewal. They said it in a recent episode of Mando, the New Republic controls the outer rim. That's a kind of a twist on Phantom Menace when Shmi's sitting there going, the Republic doesn't exist out here. So they've put their focus in different parts of the galaxy, which has probably allowed the Empire to make footholds in different parts that they normally wouldn't expect to at this point of time. I'm thinking, just gut feeling straight away, is that this will be the show that if Cara gets some kind of inverted commas spin-off, this is where she'll move into and you'll see more of her in this. But also it gives you great opportunities to bring in other characters. If you're going to see Mayfeld again, maybe this is where you see him. Maybe there's opposite, because he was clearly military trained, that from The Believer. So, there's options there. There's a lot of scope with a project like this to really, one, get around the galaxy, and two, see a lot of it. And in a similar way to Kenobi, I think having Hayden in as Darth Vader gives you opportunity to see the Emperor, to see Coruscant, to see what's politically going on in the galaxy, not just what Ben's doing on Tatooine, but much broader than that. I think you'll see Yoda in Kenobi. I think there's lots of scope to broaden it right out. I think this could be the same with Rangers. It's not just the characters you're following, it's the broader story. Like Bad Batch, like we said last episode about Bad Batch, there's a broader story going on that it gives us the opportunity to see that.
They said on Stars.com that it's set within the timeline of The Mandalorian, and it's executive produced by Favreau and Filoni. So this is a fairly logical and not a huge leap to see Cara Dune in this as one of the main characters, at least. Every single announcement has got a title, and I think these kind of graphics are there mainly to kind of evoke a vibe for each of these series and films and stuff. So it hopefully gives us an idea that, like you said, is possibly going to be tied into New Republic, and so it could be a slightly kind of more military themed kind of show, which is cool. So I'm all for this one.
Yeah, that's a good point. Before we move on, that's a really good point you're making, that this will give us an insight into the military, into the Republic, or the New Republic at that point of time, that sort of 6 years after Jedi era, to see where they are. Because we've seen a couple of troopers, we've seen the X-Wings, we've seen the pilots. We've not seen, beyond that, we've not seen a huge amount.
So, at least for me anyway, the big announcement, the one that got me really excited, was Rogue Squadron. This is the confirmation of the film that's meant to be released in December of 2023, helmed by Patty Jenkins, who directed Wonder Woman and Wonder Woman 1984. And at least from the tease, the little sizzle tease that they put out on Twitter and on social media, it looks like it's going to be an awesome pilot fest. And also with a name like Rogue Squadron, what more could you get? I'm very excited about this. How about you? Where do you sit on this one?
I feel very much like you when we talked the other day and you said, this is Top Gear for Star Wars. I thought that was a very astute observation.
Top Gear or Top Gun?
Top Gear. With her history, her dad being a pilot, that aspect, she was brought up in and around that. So as she said in the sizzle thing, it's a sort of film I've always wanted to make because I'm close to it and I understand it, and it's something that interests me. And then, of course, Star Wars. Who wouldn't want to make a Star Wars film? So those two worlds coming together. And also, having seen Wonder Woman is a brilliant film, character-wise as well as visually. Wonder Woman 1984, some of the stuff I've seen from that just looks ridiculously good. So I'm really excited about that. So her being brought into this feels like a top-tier choice as a director. They've took a few chances with directors previously that haven't quite panned out, and now it feels like they're more judiciously picking their directors. But yeah, she's confident that she can deliver because you can hear that in her voice, and then of course she falls on the orange, which was really cool, and walks towards the X-Wing. It was like, yeah.
This could be kind of like, I don't know, Iron Eagle 4 kind of thing, kind of bringing back like some veterans from Rogue Squadron to set up a new squadron.
We brought Wedge back for Rise of Skywalker, didn't we, sir?
Well, exactly. It's quite possible. And as much as it was great to see Wedge in Rise of Skywalker, if you blinked at the wrong time, you missed him. So
totally. Yeah.
I would love to see Dennis Lawson back in a more substantial role, even if it's like General Antilles, for instance. But that could be the thing, and that might be the way that you kind of almost tick both boxes. They could potentially, because it's New Republic and they're pretty short on gear, could kind of bring some old T-65s from mothballs and they train at those. and they're up against, newer modern kind of TIE fighters or different ships. I mean, who knows? So yeah, I get the feeling based on Patty's kind of like history with this, I think that we're going to get something that feels kind of authentic emotionally as well, rather than just cool dogfights in space and stuff like that. She was actually putting on a Rogue One era flight suit.
Okay.
So, because they're a lot more shiny than their OT era ones. But hey, the girl can skate. I thought she was pretty cool, being able to do all that in a pair of blades like she did. So,
and one other question on this one. If you'd have said to me 2 years ago, they're doing a Rogue Squadron project, I'd have gone, they're doing a Rogue Squadron TV series, because it feels like, reading the old books and comics, for example, it always felt like they were a family of characters, and you could do, you had that Great Dark Horse run, you had the Stackpole and Aaron Alston books and all of that stuff. It felt like that was where you would go with it. Now they're doing it as a film. Given that Disney have basically said in the investor meeting that streaming and Disney Plus is really their prime focus now. Do you think this film will lead into another film, or do you think this film will lead into another TV series?
I think that this could possibly be a sub-franchise. This could be a Rogue Squadron series, and, you might even find that if they do that by the second or third time, a film gets released, if they just call it Rogue Squadron and don't even necessarily include Star Wars in the title, it could be like that. I think also it's partly down to having to attract a heavyweight director like Patty Jenkins. I think is possibly one reason why it's a film. But also, whilst they're really pushing the Disney Plus streaming service, they're not turning their back on cinema, so you've got to do both. Similarly, like with the Marvel announcements, there's a lot of Marvel series being announced, but they still announced Captain Marvel 2 and some other kind of exactly.
Yeah,
so but that will be part of it, because there might be some directors who are like, I'm all about the theatrical film rather than the platform for streaming. And it might just be down to the fact that, again, it could be a schedule thing. It might just be like how the schedules work and stuff like that. But Disney definitely need to hit both kind of like aspects at the same time. So we need to hit the cinema and we need to hit streaming, because I think if you relegate Star Wars to just one or the other, then you're missing out on like some great like storytelling opportunities.
Taika Waititi. So Taika, we know he's doing a film. I think we all assume that his film would be the next film, the Christmas 23 one. That's not the case. What did you make of the presentation with Taika? Because the thing that caught me out a little bit was that logo. That logo looked weird and odd, and I didn't quite know what to make of it. And knowing his comedic sensibilities, which is great, we love his humour. Well, two questions. And we have talked about Taika before, and I remember we did say back then maybe he's got a great serious film in him. Maybe we're doing him a disservice by assuming it will be humorous. But then that logo made me think, how can it be anything but? So what do you make of that?
You're right. The logo is a little bit way out there. You add that with what Kathleen Kennedy said during the presentation, which was Taika's approach to Star Wars will be fresh, unexpected, and ... unique. His enormous talent and sense of humour will ensure the audience are in for an unforgettable ride. So I suppose for the overcautious side of me thinks, could we be in for another bumpy ride like we had with Solo, and how they kind of pushed one type of film then to find that actually we're getting something totally different.
You make a good point about Solo, in that obviously there are issues there. They expected one film and got another. Given that Taika is very much a Disney darling, he's directed Mando, he's directed Thor, he's directing the next Thor. You can only assume, given his Oscar win for Jojo Rabbit and other projects that are on the go that are popular, that they would not want to upset this guy, because he would be courted by any number of other streamers. Netflix would want him, Amazon would want him, Apple would want him. Do you think if they had an issue that they would have I can't think of any other way of saying it, would have the balls to move him out and bring a Ron Howard type person in to right the ship?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the thing is, the episode that he did of The Mandalorian was one of the strongest episodes of season 1. Yeah. So it's not like we can say that like he doesn't get Star Wars, because from all intents and purposes, it sounds like he kind of does.
Completely.
I wonder, though, maybe if the gestation period for this would be longer. For instance, that he's like, right, this is my first script, so to speak, my first kind of story outline, and it's way out there. And then obviously it's at that point they have to kind of like rein it in and push it into different directions. Because the thing is, you can't hand tie your creatives, your writers out too much early on. So I guess the way to do it is you've got to give them the option to kind of like explore themes and what have you, but then kind of shape the actual overall like film. It's like sculpting, you start off with a rough form and then you chip away, chip, and you get to something looking fantastic. And so it could just be like that. Maybe it's more of a case of actually, they didn't announce a date for this, so possibly this is really early days in respects of like he's down to write something, but they're not going to kind of confirm it until, they've seen the script and they're happy with it, I guess.
That's a good point. I mean, I just wonder and think, we heard what we heard about Solo, for example. And Disney and Lucasfilm were reasonably forthcoming, but they didn't delve into any great detail. And bits have come out since. But I just wonder whether or not, if you're a writer in Hollywood, if you're a director in Hollywood, those people would know all about what happened because it's their business to know, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so you wonder if Taika's going in, he would know what happened with Lord and Miller, and he would know what happened with Ron Howard coming in, and Lawrence Kasdan doing another polish or whatever it might be. Do you think, or you can only assume really, that he would have been briefed, we can't have that happen again. There's too much money on the line. We lost a lot of money on, so they did. I mean, it's just, I think it's one of the top 10 most expensive films ever made. So it certainly took a bath in that sense. But I just wonder how it would be broached with him. These people must know. They're not stupid. It's bigger than the ego of a director. And I don't know what Taika's ego is like. He's certainly a funny guy. Creatives are what they are. You'd know more about that in the industry you're in.
I think, obviously, one of the things that The Mandalorian was going to do was to set up and, be used to kind of like focus and hone some potential talent and directorial talent, which of course, that's the thing. It's a big risk, isn't it? To just kind of go, right, here's $200 million, go make me the Star Wars film you've always wanted to make, and then find out when you're halfway through that budget that actually that Star Wars film that you've always wanted them to make isn't actually necessarily the one that you were hoping they were going to make.
Yes.
Different directors have different sensibilities. Some are very collaborative and others are very much, this is my story, this is what I want, and are uncompromising. And that's not necessarily a negative thing, because actually sometimes that's how you get the best out of them and also you get the best story. But it's just going to be a matter of how Taika works within the Lucasfilm kind of machine. Now, he's had a bit of taste, and obviously The Mandalorian was a fairly kind of controlled way of working, I suppose. It was pretty much written by John and Dave, and so therefore there was kind of clear guidelines and boundaries as to what they could do for each episode. Hopefully that's kind of like a good entry in, and you'd think that if he was really difficult to work with or they were kind of had concerns, that he probably wouldn't have been offered it. But obviously the experience that he had and the experience that Lucasfilm had working with him on The Mandalorian is a reason enough to kind of like move ahead with a new film.
The final project's another surprise, Star Wars Visions. So 10 animated adventures done by Japanese animation houses. Doesn't say when they're set. I'm assuming, gut feeling tells me they could be set any time, any era, in a Star Wars Tales type scenario. So you could finally get that Darth Vader versus Darth Maul story that we've always wanted to see animated. What do you make of this? This one came out the blue, but it feels like it could be a launch bed if certain ones are popular for more stories, for other stuff.
Exactly. It could be a whole different strand that could just be, like you said, a way of kind of maybe testing the ground for some ideas. That'd be the interesting thing, is like whether or not they use it as a way to maybe introduce some characters that maybe they wanted to kind of just see how, the fans take to them before they insert them into other properties. Or like they've kind of done already, they could do different takes on stuff. Like, for instance, they could even do something very similar to like Infinity's Dark Horse range, where, what happens if like Luke doesn't make that Death Star shot and, the rebels get destroyed at Yavin, that kind of stuff. There's lots of different ways you can go about it, but it's quite fun that they're using different studios. So I think this will be probably the most artistically diverse way of doing Star Wars, and maybe this is, like I said, a way of just potentially trying to find some different avenues that they could then explore for another animated series, for instance. So this could almost be like 10 pilots.
That's a good way of thinking of it. Yeah, I mean, my head thinks to Galaxy of Adventures and how much people have enjoyed the animated versions of what we know.
Yeah.
And I'd certainly like to see more in that animation style, which is very much of that sort of Japanese style anyway. So, and think back 4 or 5 years to when, do you remember when the TIE Fighter manga style animation came out that people flipped over, that was fan made? You could be seeing stuff like that, which was really incredible. So superb scope in here, but my head definitely tells me, and I'd like to be wrong because I want everything to be canon, but this could be the area where you do get Star Wars Tales or What If, that kind of arena to tell the stories that we never got, the left turn instead of the right sort of thing.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think after all that, and with the end of season 2 of Mandalorian, I need to lie down for a few weeks and wait for the gallery to kick off. But anyway, let's call this episode done and dusted. Let's move on to the next one. And I want to thank everybody for listening once again. If you've got any questions or comments you want to make about the new Star Wars announcements that have come out, or Mandalorian Season 2, or anything you don't like about me, or anything you especially don't like about Mark, you can do that. You can give us an email or drop us a text or something, and Mr. Newbold is going to tell you how you can do it.
You're such a dick. If you want to be part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit FanthaTracks.com or check out the free, cost you nothing, FanthaTracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@FanthaTracks.com. Like Mark just said, send in your questions, send in your thoughts. We'll read them out. We love to hear from you, so please get them in there. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at FanthaTracks, and be sure to subscribe. Leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, but doesn't have to be. We just like any old reviews on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing our FanthaTracks intro, Adam O'Brien for the Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. And be sure to watch Good Morning Tatooine, our weekly news show, live on FanthaTracks Facebook every Sunday at 9 o'clock UK time, and then later in the week on FanthaTracks TV and FanthaTracks YouTube, and also on the site.
You take care, mate.
I will, and you.
Stay safe, everybody.
Coming up next on FanthaTracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.
Hello, this is Jeremy Bulloch, Boba Fett from Star Wars.